I'm Joe Legato, and this is the Joe Legato Show. I have a doctorate in industrial and organizational psychology, and we're going to be applying the social and behavioral sciences to contemporary issues. And today we'll be talking about America's relationship with China. We're going to start off going over the historical antagonism of China and the West, discussing specifically the Century of Humiliation and the Opium Wars. And to start off with, the Opium Wars really started because of the fact that China was manufacturing so many high quality goods that were of value to the West, particularly the United Kingdom. And United Kingdom did not like sending so many resources to China, such as their silver, in return for those useful goods that China produces. Because of that, the United Kingdom, having access to its colony of India and other various colonies in the area, decided to start producing opium and selling this drug that was destructive to the Chinese people so that they could get their silver back from China. And a commissioner within China sent a letter to Queen Victoria of England talking about the detrimental effects of this substance. And I will bring up and I will discuss this substance. So we have the letter. And the letter Lynn sent to Queen Victoria of England said, "We find that your country is 60 or 70,000 li from China." And li in this case is a unit of measurement to say that essentially the United Kingdom is on the other side of the world from China. "The purpose of your ships in coming to China is to realize a large profit. Since this profit is realized in China as in fact taken away from the Chinese people, how can foreigners return injury for the benefit they have received by sending this poison to harm their benefactors?" So Lin here is trying to convey to the leadership of the United Kingdom, hey, we are helping you people and you're destroying us in return. We want the opium trade to stop. Either we will enforce it on our own territory, our sovereign territory, or we would like you to stop producing it and selling it to us, or both. He goes on to say they may not intend to harm others on purpose, but the fact remains that they are so obsessed with material gain that they have no concern whatever for the harm they can cause to others. Have they no conscience? And this is a common critique of capitalism, that people pursue material gains and they don't care about harming others. And he is being extremely gracious here, saying they may not intend to harm others on purpose, when I think a lot of people in China would say that there was the intent to harm. They were they were fearful of a large manufacturing base, such as China, that has historically been a world superpower. But Lin in this letter is being extremely gracious and saying it was not intended to harm. "I've heard that you strictly prohibit opium in your own country, indicating unmistakably that you know how harmful opium is. You do not wish opium to harm your own country, but you choose to bring that harm to other countries such as China. Why?" Here he's showing the complete hypocrisy of the colonial powers at this time, and we can see some direct translations to that, direct connections to that in modern times, where the West will do things in other countries, harass, distract, cause chaos in other countries that it would never allow to have happen in its own country. And so they're saying, well, if you're not going to allow this, if you're going to prohibit opium and other drugs in your own country, you should also do that in China as well. "The products that originate from China are all useful items." So here again, he's saying China is a net benefit to the world. "They are good for food and other purposes and are easy to sell. Has China produced one item that is harmful to foreign countries? For instance, tea and rhubarb are so important to foreigners' livelihood that they have to consume them every day. Were China to concern itself only with her own advantage without showing any regard for other people's welfare, how could foreigners continue to live?" And so he's saying that if China really wanted to be a detriment, they could be a major detriment. "I've heard that the areas under your direct jurisdiction, such as London, Scotland, Ireland, do not produce opium. It is produced instead in your Indian possessions, such as Bengal, Madras, Bombay, Patna, and Malwa. In these possessions, the English people not only plant opium poppies that stretch from one mountain to another, but also open factories to manufacture this drug. So they're saying that uh, the UK is going out of its way to produce this. They're willing to even construct factories in order to make sure that this is produced in order to sell to China. And then he goes on to say that as months accumulate and years pass by, the poison they have produced increases in its wicked intensity and its repugnant odor reaches as high as the sky. And so he's essentially saying that they're making it more and more detrimental, increasing the severity of opium's effect on the individual and further harming Chinese society every month and every year. Heaven is furious with anger, and all the gods are moaning with pain. It is hereby suggested that you destroy and plow under all of these opium plants and grow food crops instead, while issuing an order to punish severely anyone who dares to plant opium poppies again. So again, asking UK, hey, we're doing beneficial things for you, why don't you return the favor? A murderer of one person is subject to a death sentence. Just imagine how many people opium has killed. This is the rationale behind the new law, which says that any foreigner who brings opium to China will be sentenced to death by hanging or beheading. Our purpose is to eliminate this poison once and for all to the benefit of all of mankind. And you can read this on Wikipedia. There's also a ton of images, a ton of different websites where you can read that letter as well. And so you see here that China, during the century of humiliation, has faced two opium wars, and two opium wars occurred after that letter, where the colonial powers, particularly the United Kingdom, were like, you want to stop opium sales in your country, we're not allowing it. And so they invaded, they attacked various parts of China. And multiple Western countries were involved. France ended up becoming involved in the Second Opium War. United States ended up benefiting from it. Various other powers ended up using the using China to its own benefit as well. And so that's why it's the century of humiliation. Some other reasons for historical antagonism between the West and China are the Korean War, which took place between 1950 and 1953, and that was a defining moment for China-US relations. The war was fought between North Korea, which was backed by China and the Soviet Union. Remember, this was before the split between Soviet Union and China over ideological differences related to communism, and South Korea, backed by the United States and its allies. The war ended in a stalemate, so both of those countries are still around today, North Korea and South Korea, but it did enforce to China that the West, the colonial powers, were still its enemy. And then you had the Vietnam War from 1955 to 1975, and the US and China were on opposing sides. North Vietnam supported by China, and South Vietnam supported by the United States. And the United States, again, lost that war, just like they lost the Afghan War recently. And so even the Korean War and the Vietnam War were land-based wars. And China, historically, has been a land-based power, and they've only had threats, they've only had to be fearful of other land-based powers, particularly the Mongol Empire. They were fearful of them. But with the century of humiliation, with the Opium Wars, and more recently with United States' antagonism towards China, China has had to be fearful of naval powers, and it's had to become a naval power in turn. And so historically, China has been a continental land-based power that has really been introspective. It's really focused on its own internal affairs, but now it has to worry about particularly its east and southeast, the South China Sea area. And this current crisis with America and with other US allies probably reminds China, I'm sure it does, of that century of humiliation, of the Opium Wars, of the harassment that China faced by colonial powers. And so we're going to show some pictures of China being surrounded as well as other countries being surrounded as well. So let me bring that up. So here we have an example of China building its country too close to many American military bases. And China, very rightfully, considers itself surrounded. Places like Australia, the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, all of these have a ton of United States military bases, and the United States would ideally like to use people from other countries to die fighting China instead of having Americans die fighting China. And so this is not only a very, very provocative measure by the United States against China, having all these bases like right on its border, but also this is the United States trying to use other countries as meat shields. And there was a saying when it came to the Ukraine war too, where it was, we're going to use Ukrainian bodies and American bullets to fight this war against Russia. And that's what the United States wants to do with East Asian and Southeast Asian powers. They want to use them against China. And a lot of countries are waking up to this fact and are making sure to not face that same problem. We see here that this is occurring with other nations as well. Iran, completely surrounded on both sides. Well, I guess you could say three of the sides, east, west, and south. It is surrounded by American military bases. So again, you have to ask yourself, well, why did Iran build its nation so close to American military bases, right? And then you see the same thing happening here again. The Soviet Union, now Russia, asked America, please do not expand further east. And the United States was like, don't worry about it. So Russia focused on its own internal matters. Soviet Union collapsed. And what happens after the fall of the Soviet Union? America goes back on its word. And it shows that it's untrustworthy and starts to expand east. You see all those countries in purple. And then I believe the tan are countries that are looking to join the NATO alliance. And here you see it's not only the NATO military alliance expanding eastward, but you see that they're placing troops eastward too, which is obviously very threatening to Russia. And so the United States builds military bases, puts troops on borders of other nations, harasses other nations, provokes other nations in order to destabilize them, split them up if they're very large nations, etc., etc. And so China has to think now, how do we solve this problem? They want to solve it in a diplomatic way, but the United States is clearly being very antagonistic, and you see that here with the what's called the arc of containment, where they would love to use all these various nations around China in order to contain China. And so in summary, for this segment, there is historical antagonism between China and the West. And some of these events that are the foundation for this historical antagonism are the Opium Wars, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Okay. The Opium Wars were fought between China and Britain, but you can see the United States as a successor to Great Britain. The Korean War solidified China's commitment to being an anti-colonial power. And in the Vietnam War, the US and China clearly had opposing interests, and China and North Vietnamese won that war versus America. And remember, the clear takeaway from this is while China has, particularly in the past, focused on its own internal problems and been a continental land-based power, China now has to consider itself a, if not regional, a fully global, or if not global, a regional power at the very least, and has to consider becoming a larger naval power, which it clearly is and clearly has focused on over the past decade. And we see this arc of containment on the screen right now. And China clearly has to consider what to do about that, how to break free from that so it can become a naval and mercantile power so it doesn't face another century of humiliation. And that's what it's currently doing.